I upload daily NBA content on this channel, so if that's something you're interested in, subscribe and also drop a like on this video. Also, I'm gonna say once more, I made a documentary on the 2020 season and it did not do as well as I had hoped, so go check that out. That's going to be linked in the description, in the pinned comment, and in the card above. I have had an issue for quite a while about former NBA players that I have not been able to find the proper way to put into words yet. There's a problem that exists with former players in the NBA that I'm sure exists with other sports and leagues, but is particularly prominent in the NBA, and it's something that isn't talked about much, at least explicitly. That problem is that former players, particularly those in the media, both commentary and on NBA shows, bring a pretty much non-stop barrage of hate and contempt towards modern basketball, its concepts, and its players. I cannot turn on a game with NBA players on the call without hearing them complain or bitch about modern basketball in some way or another. Whether it be complaining about the three-point shooting, a lack of real big men, teams not posting up enough, basically the NBA not being like it was from 2010 to previous. This is a problem that I think is not talked about enough and a problem that has a bigger impact than it's given credit for. So let's talk about it.
Save! Absolutely incredibly with the acrobatic alley-oop!
First, let's talk about why some former NBA players do what they do, and then I'll point to some examples. The main reason for this common trend is ego. Everyone has one, and the more successful you are, the more likely you are to have a bigger one. So in the case of former NBA players, especially those at the top of NBA history, they usually have some pretty massive egos, and generally speaking, that is rightfully the case. Michael Jordan is allowed to act like he's that dude, because he is that dude. He's Michael Jordan. If I was Michael Jordan, you're damn right I'd be a dick about it, because I'd be Michael Jordan. But that egoism can extend past talking about your own greatness and greatness from players of your era to hating on current NBA players' greatness and this era in order to elevate your own. And I do want to make it clear out of the jump that this is not explicitly new. It's probably more prominent today, but it's not a new thing. There are plenty of clips you can find of Wilt Chamberlain criticizing Michael Jordan, with some of his arguments pertaining to why Jordan's era wasn't as good as Wilt's 60s and 70s, which is pretty funny because Wilt thinks he's the GOAT and Jordan isn't, but the point is, it exists outside of just today. This is a natural thing that happens a lot. It's like the old man yells at clouds meme, or like everyone thinks their generation is better than the one that follows. But this problem is something that brings a negative vibe to NBA games and the NBA in general that I think has wider effects than it's given credit for. And I genuinely think it hurts the NBA's ratings. It's also not just ego. Ironically, it is a bit of insecurity, and those two can be together intertwined very often, but it's insecurity that I don't entirely understand. Like, let's talk about Shaq, for example. Like, why does this guy spend so much time hating on Dwight Howard? He was so threatened by the fact that people started calling Dwight Superman, like literally anybody considered Dwight Howard to be greater than Shaq. I really just don't understand it. Like, why so insecure, dude? Not that insecurity is always logical, but it still doesn't make sense to me. But it's these combinations of factors, as well as a common tactic, that leads to the current generation of NBA players and modern basketball being crapped on so much by former players. That tactic is hating on following generations in order to make your own seem better. You hate on a player or period of time to make another player or period of time seem superior. Players from the 90s today say that the 2010s suck and that the 90s was better. So that means because the 90s was better, those players by association were better, so there's no threat to their own legacy. If the 2010 sucks and the 90s were better, then obviously the players of the 90s were better, so these current players cannot overtake players from the 90s. We've also seen this tactic from fans and media personalities in the GOAT debate. Like, if the 90s were a garbage era, then LeBron is the GOAT. If the 2010s is a garbage era, then Jordan is the GOAT. This logic is used by individual players themselves. Prop up your era and tear down another one, and that will make your era being the best mean that you are one of the best. But now let's look at some examples. First, I want to talk about everyone's favorite, the TNT crew. Now, I do not dislike this crew at all because there is a lot of positive that comes with the negative of them. But it is unfortunate that the show is at its best when it's being funny and not when there's actual basketball discussion to be had, considering the amount of legendary basketball talent there is in that room. It can be fun listening to them relive the glory days or take jabs at each other based on those days, but when it comes time to talk about today's players and today's basketball concepts, they are almost never given their due credit. But I wrote the rest of this script before I wrote this part, so I mentioned them a bunch following this, so I'm just going to stop that general discussion here, but you'll hear more about them later. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite as well, and this time I am being sarcastic, players only. When I said in the intro that this problem wasn't complained about explicitly, this is what I was talking about. What I meant by saying it wasn't complained about explicitly was that it was complained about, people just didn't really figure out the root of the problem. Pretty much everyone and their mother said that they did not like players only. However, I don't know how many people actually said why they don't like players only. Sure, there were a lot of clips to be taken where it was just awkward because these guys are not great in the media section of things. Like, just because a guy played in the NBA does not mean he's good at covering the NBA. Because basketball and basketball commentary are two very different things that require different skill sets. It's why players commentating over games or being on shows are best used as a side part and not the main event. It's why most of the time there's a play-by-play commentary guy who doesn't have experience in the NBA, with former NBA players adding anecdotes and their point of view as former players rather than being the main commentary. And with players only, there were players involved who clearly were not good enough on their own at that job, and it made the whole thing awkward and seem unprofessional. And that was certainly a big issue to me. However, my biggest gripe was something that, again, don't feel is complained about enough, and that is former players constantly shitting on modern basketball. This issue was in its purest form with players only. The product on the court got basically non-stop onslaught with players only with no break. At least with the media around games combined with players, we got commentary from play-by-play guys and the occasional bang from Mike Breen. But with players only, you got these guys that did not know what they were doing, and then you also got them looking for things to talk about, which eventually led to criticizing three-point shooting and complaining about not enough post-ups or mid-range shots. With it being the normal mix of media personalities and former NBA players, at least that content was filtered. With players only, this was unfiltered bashing pretty much non-stop. And because of the poor reception to players only, TNT eventually stopped doing it. I swear to God, every time there was players only on a big game day, players only was trending on Twitter. It truly got exhausting. Now I have an example on the positive end of things. Draymond Green was consistently joining the TNT crew during the 2020 playoffs, and this was a breath of fresh air. Draymond, who is a brilliant basketball mind and someone who plays in the NBA today, was able to give his perspective as someone who obviously respects and understands modern basketball concepts. Draymond's recommendation to the team that was losing at the half wasn't shooting less threes as it always seems to be with the TNT crew, and he talked about rotations on defense and things like that. Really just brought nuance that wasn't normally there. Anytime Kenny would go up to the big screen to point out the issues, almost all of the complaints were just that they weren't doing it like they were in the 90s. And it's just exhausting because it's not true. Draymond was pretty much universally praised for what he did as a commentator, and I hope that once he retires, this is something that he chooses to do full time. So what is the takeaway here? Well, unfortunately, a lot of former players can be quite bitter and spend a lot of time talking shit about the current era. It's a way of propping up their own legend by shitting on the eras today, and to me, it's honestly pretty damn sad. It hurts the legend to me to see these guys like tear down players. It makes them feel weak. In terms of entertainment value, it does not get a whole lot better than Shaq and Chuck, and that's the reason why they get so much praise. However, when it actually comes time for basketball commentary, I'm often left rolling my eyes. Not because they aren't knowledgeable. Shaq is one of the 10 best players ever, and Chuck isn't all that far behind. However, because these two have such fragile egos and a sense of what's good or not good for basketball that they deem it necessary to remind us of constantly, it holds back the perspective and insight that they could provide in favor of petty bullshit. I wish former players could just be more like Allen Iverson. That dude loves current players and just in general props up players of this generation, and I'm certain he will continue to prop up coming generations. And he's not the only one. Kareem and Bill Russell are also great examples. Kobe, before he died, embraced younger players all the time. I would just like to watch a basketball game without what I'm watching being constantly criticized. I'm there to have a good time, and when it seems like the people who are talking over the games are not having a good time, it ruins my good time. I want the people on the call to be enjoying themselves, not just hating and then collecting a paycheck. I don't have a solution to this problem, I just know it's a problem. And while the NBA continues to have rating issues, I can't help but wonder if this is a part of it. If you're a casual viewer and you tune into a game and all of the people talking about the game can do is complain about it, then naturally you're going to be viewing the game with a more negative lens and eventually you'll stop watching. This is why I can't stand Jeff Van Gundy. I understand he is a coach and not a player, but he does have the same issue. A lot of people really like Jeff Van Gundy, and for good reason. A, he has really good chemistry with the guy he's usually on the call with, who is Mark Jackson. They have some funny jabs at each other pretty much always. But B, more importantly, he knows his stuff a lot better than 99% of commentators, even former players and coaches themselves. He very often provides insight that you don't find anywhere else, but I can't stand him, because 90% of the time he is talking, he is complaining about something or another. And even if I agree with him, which does happen regularly, it just puts me in a negative mindset as someone who loves the game to a probably unhealthy extent. So how do you think that impacts a viewer who doesn't love basketball the way that I do? It probably turns them off. I don't really know how to end this video, so I'm just going to end it. If you want to support this content outside of just your like and subscription, you can support me over on Patreon, where you can give me some money for some extra content. Also, shout out to my editor, Rudy, for editing this video. That is the end of this video. Please be sure to like, subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.